I am Jeff Burrows. I'm drummer percussionist for the band The Tea Party. We are heading out on tour to celebrate our 25th anniversary of an album called Triptych that came out in 1999. Our bass player, keyboard player, multi-instrumentalist Stuart Chatwood, aka Chats, is ready and anxious to get out there. And then, of course, Australia's adopted son, Jeff the Cat Martin, is we can't find him today, but that's okay.
He's MIA.
You're somebody in Australia has kidnapped the singer.
As we do.
so you're stuck with the drummer, and I'm sorry, but hey, you get all the dirt this way, so it's good.
Mate, always a pleasure to talk to the drummer, mate. How's he going today, Jeff?
Today has been really good. I had a weird sleep last night, and I think it's finally hitting me that, we're getting to go back to our second home. It's been 5 years, or a little bit more, and honestly, I'm just chuffed. And I honestly could not get to sleep until about 3:30 last night, and I'm thinking I got so much to do today. So I'm a little tired, but I'm all jazzed up because I get to talk to the likes of yourself, so it's good.
Very sweet of you, mate. Very nice to say. So, as you mentioned, the Tea Party returned to Australia for the Triptych 25 tour this June for runner shows starting in Perth on June 16th. Then you go through Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, and Wollongong, and finish in Brisbane on June the 25th. That's a bit far away, mate, I know. So have you got any shows between now and then to warm up, or are you just coming in here?
No, we're each so with this tour, it's not like a top to tail sort of album sequenced show. We're going to play 8 or 9, including some of the deeper cuts that we've never even played before, mixed with some other B-sides and deeper cuts, and of course some of the hits. But we've got still a month and a half or 2 months still to rehearse on our own, which is great, and which I've started. And we have a 5 days worth of production in Australia once Stuart and I get there, I believe on the 7th or so. And then, and we've got a couple days for writing as well, because we've got ideas that we've started working on. So everyone's pretty happy. Plans are set in place. Marketing's in motion. You know the deal.
All the fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned before that it'll be your first time out here in 5 years. So you haven't been to Australia since 2019. So what's changed with the Tea Party between then and now?
I think I can honestly say it's probably an appreciation for, where we're at, what we've been afforded, the types of shows that we get to do. We've been doing this for over 30 years now, and ask me 30 years ago if I thought that I'd still be able to travel abroad and play shows in front of people who love our music and sing along with us and so on. I never would have thought that it'd be possible. So I think being grateful, more communicative, and the fact that, it's easily the best job, if you have to call it that, in the world. So, there's no complaints here. It doesn't even really get harder. It kind of gets a little bit easier because you don't worry now about, back in the day, we would cross Canada in a van. We've crossed Canada 13 times in a van before we even signed. And you didn't know if you were making it to the next town. Canada's a lot like Australia. I mean, you're going from Perth to Adelaide in a van. That's essentially Vancouver to Calgary in a van. And it's brutal. And there's overnight drives after the show. You're still sweating because there was only one hotel. It was already done. There's no shower at these tiny little clubs. So things get a little bit easier as you get a little bit older. And I don't know, I think we've moved in quite well.
Nice. Now, of course, this tour is celebrating the 25th anniversary of the album Triptych, which was also your first #1 album in Australia. So it makes it that little bit more special doing it here.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. So thanks for that.
You can have yourself with that knowledge.
I didn't know we had a number one. But I mean, we could say that about Triptych in Australia, but Australia has always been, honestly, at some points better than home country because, it's just such a wild, like when we tour in Canada, if we have a crazy wild night, it's always like, that was so Australian. I couldn't believe it. You know what I mean? Like Edmonton, Montreal. There's a few places in Canada that it's just like, holy shit, that was so Melbourne, or that was so Adelaide, you know. So we're very much looking forward to it. It's going to be such a jam. I can't wait, man. It's going to be great.
Uh-huh. Now, the press release, you sort of touched on this a little bit more, but I want to go into a bit more detail. Like the press
Yeah,
release says that they're going to be exploring the album on a more in-depth basis. So what do you
yeah.
actually mean by that?
Well, there's some songs that we haven't even performed live, and to be able, now that I've started rehearsing for this specifically, it's not like it's difficult to relearn it or anything like that, but it's just it wakes up the muscle memory of these songs that, I mean, some got half written in studio, some were mostly written, some were changed in studio. I mean, just like every other band. But
Yeah.
the fact that we're going in and we're doing songs that some were never even performed live for us is just, it's exciting for me, because bands, like any other gig, I guess, you can fall into a rut. You just don't want to become a parody of your own band. You want to challenge yourself. And we recently did some more symphony shows in Canada, and literally a day and a half rehearsal with these orchestras. And at first we were, of course the nerves were flying and so on and so forth. But then after a while, you're like, this is pretty fucking amazing. You're challenging yourself. You're in your 50s, and there's not many things in life that puts you to the test when you get a little bit older. And it just kind of elevates that whole, je ne sais quoi. Like you get the frisson on your arm, the hairs stick up, and you just feel that much better about being able to do something. I mean, I see that with a lot of the heavy bands out right now that are coming back out, and I'm like, good on you, man. Like if you can get that shit done, then right on. Like your Sepulturas and your Panteras and stuff, good on them. Like get out there and bang some heads, because for them a lot of this is new again, and at an older age you just have to kind of assess the situation, assess your physicality, adjust, and provide. And when I see that, it just makes me happy, because there's zero reason for anyone to have to retire from music. Just be like Charlie Watts and pass away, and the band moves on,
Well
with
said.
all the love in the world to Charlie. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, why? There's no need. This isn't sports.
Yeah.
This is art. Painters don't quit. Why quit? Just have a great time. And I love it, especially with the heavy bands. I'm like, right on, man. Give it.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Now, I want to talk more about these songs that you're playing that have never been played before live. Like, there's a reason they haven't been played before live. Like, is it hard to, like, whatever that reason is it hard in any way to be able to do it now? Like, I suppose it'd be things you did in the studio that'd be hard to replicate live.
Yeah, so you're right. For me, not so much, because drums are drums. I mean, there are added percussions on certain things, but for Jeff and Stuart, particularly on this record, where there was quite a bit of overdubbing and so on, Jeff's singing, playing rhythm, then going into a solo. When he goes into a solo, Stuart's on bass, and then the bass keyboards with his feet take over the rhythm portion of the guitar. And then that's up to them to be doing this. And it's a bit of like inviting them into my world, because drummers have to do four limbs at a time nonstop anyway. So for them, I just kind of smirk and say, have at her, man. Good luck, fellas. This is what I got to do every day. But I suppose, you know what I mean? Jeff likens it, and Stuart likens it to looking at a picture or a painting and squinting your eyes and then drawing the primary colors out of it. So you know what I mean? So if you got a mountainscape, you're going to see the white caps, a little bit of the gray rock, and the blue sky. So those are your primaries. You're going to pull those, and you're going to make those most evident in the performance. So once we get back together as a whole, then we'll decide, or we'll figure out what is sounding best. Because I know they're both working on those types of situations right now. It's pretty cool.
Wow. And now 25 years is a long time in music, bro. So do you think that Triptych has actually stood the test of time musically?
I get asked this now and then, and I mean, I see online that people say that all the time. It's a little, they're all of our babies. But I don't think there's not too much on any of our records that stand out as being like some of the great albums in the 80s, for example, have the craziest, most off the wall keyboard sounds. And you're just like, ooh, God, no. You know what I mean? It's just like, no, no. So we don't have anything like that because, we'd always chose to use traditional instruments, whether they're from the West or the East. And when we did do more of an electronic style record, we were using, old cards and loading up sounds and so on. So it wasn't very um, to the time to the time of the recording. You know what I mean? Like we don't use the latest and the greatest. We never have. We just use the tried, tested, and true um, uh, techniques in recording. We try to do the drums always on 2-inch tape, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there we just go on. So it's always going to sound sonically very nice, and I don't think it really ages all that much. I mean, maybe the first album, Splendor Solus, aged a little bit, but I'd be interested to hear what that sounds like remastered very well.
How about personally? Like that was half a lifetime ago. Basically, that was all done. So like playing those songs again now, like does it? Can you still connect to the 25-year-old self? I guess when you're doing it, or
So I was speaking to an interview earlier, and the one of the coolest things is when management and everyone starts piecing together all the promotion items and so on, and they get a hold of the photographers that shot us 25 years
oh,
ago,
yeah.
and you get these photos. It's just like a time capsule, and it feels like you're right there again, and you're like, I've never seen this. And there I am at the bar, no one has a cell phone, I'm opening a bottle of wine, and then you see another shot, and Jeff's singing his ass off in the studio, and Stuart and I are at the board, and you've never seen these photos before. So that kind of stuff is probably the best part of bringing back that 25 years ago feeling, because we were only, gosh, I was 30 and the boys were 29 at the time. And although, I mean, God, my oldest son is turning 29 this year, so that puts it into perspective. But it never feels like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how old you are, but 25 years ago, it doesn't feel like that. But
No.
when I was a kid, and they used to say, "Oh, back in the 60s," I used to think, Jesus Christ, the 60s are eons ago. And now the 90s are further away from the 60s was when I was a kid. And it doesn't feel that long ago at all. So I don't know what's happened to society, but it's pretty cool being able to, you know, pull out this piece of music and to perform it again, just like it was intended to be when we first released it. There's something special about that, because, I just don't want to be a band that writes this and tours the album and so on. If you've got a collection, much like a visual art collection that goes on tour and people go to enjoy it because they have certain memories of that song, they were in high school, their first kiss, their wedding song, a funeral song for a relative, all of that stuff plays such an important part in it. And for us, it's magical, because it doesn't feel like 25 years ago. Like, time is the weirdest thing, and I hope I'm not sounding like an old guy, because it's just strange to me, because you know how fucking weird it is, because it just doesn't seem like it. I don't know if it's because I'm in a band. I suppose if I worked in a factory for 25 years, maybe it'd be like, Jesus, that's been a long time. Whereas
Looks
this,
different
no, it
too.
doesn't. Yeah, I don't know.
And how about the album as a whole, like Triptych, mate? Like how, looking back, how significant was that in the Tea Party's career?
I think it's quite significant. That was the final album uh, of the 90s for us. And we did an album every other year. We had our Indie in 91, Splendor in 93, Edges 95, Transmission 97, and this in 99. And when you think about it, how prolific we were at that age and how much fun it was. And I mean, I don't want to get in trouble, but without being tied down as much as you do get to be tied down later into your 30s, 40s, and now 50s, with family and providing and paying bills just like everybody else. Back then, it was, let's get in the fucking van and go. And here we go. And you start writing at 8 at night. Before you know it, it's 7 in the morning, and you're still jamming out, and that is the beauty of being in a young band and being able to do it. So the significance, I think, is that was an era that closed off an era for us, and I think it's very significant, and I look back on it with great fondness. It's such a cool thing to think about, 5 records in 10 years, pretty cool.
So speaking of those 5 records in 10 years, mate, like how would you say that the band's sound changed from your self-titled debut in 1991 to that album in 99?
Oh, every album. It was just like, we're gonna start here. We're gonna take a left turn at Albuquerque. We're gonna take a right turn over to Sweden. It was everywhere. It was all over the map. It was nice to not sound like a band, and not throwing any band in particular under a bus, but some bands have that as their sound, and that's the way it's going to be, and boom, 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 and they have great success. For me, particularly, if I'm going to be just talking about myself, I loved the fact that, you know, we weren't afraid to do a softer song or a heavier song or a really heavy song or a song where I'm just sitting out or I'm playing tabla or I'm playing a different type of percussion. Because some drummers are just like, no, I'm the drummer, I'm playing drums. It doesn't bother me at all. So I kind of like the fact that each album, the indie album was trying to find our sound. The first real EMI Capitol Records album, I got Splendor Solace, was quite bluesy, and that came naturally because we grew up right across from Detroit City, and the blues scene is huge. And then we started touring, and we started getting into all of these indigenous style instrumentations and tunings and so on. And then we got into that, and then we were like, you know what, let's switch it up again. And then we went more electronic, but we went more classic electronic. We didn't go for the sounds of the day and so on. And then we wound up going back to almost our high school years, where when we were listening to 80s music, comparing it to Triptych, it was a lot more melodic, and it was a lot more of a mishmash between heavy and soft and dark and light. So that was a very nice decade. I mean, I couldn't have asked for anything more. Great band, great records, great marriage, great kids. I had the world by the ass. I still do. I'm very fortunate. But you gotta think that was quite the decade for old JB and the band.
Now you mentioned all of those changes that was just in that decade. Like there's been another 24 years of music in between, aside from the period you had off. But
Yeah.
when it comes to doing your live setup, Ray, like how difficult is it? Because you've got so many different styles and contrasts and emotions that you go through with your music. Like it'd be hard to get it flowing, wouldn't it? Like you'd have to put a lot of time.
It really is. Stuart is the one who usually puts together sets. But I think that's a problem that a lot of bands run into. And we are 100% guilty of one tour trying to please the fans too much. Which means, because sometimes you'll have your hardcore fans that are at every show and they don't want to hear Heaven Coming Down again. They don't want to hear Temptation again. And I get it, because I have bands that I've seen a million times and I'm like, oh, this one again, but I still don't care. But then you have the majority of the crowd who don't go to every single tour. They've got kids, they got work, they got this and that. And if they get to see every 5 to 10 years, they do want to hear that song that was a hit and they were in high school, or it reminds them of something. So it's always a challenge. It's a challenge for every band, especially when your catalog gets a little deeper than 3 albums, and that's kind of where we're at. But that's a good problem to have, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just let Stuart deal with it.
And pass it on.
Yeah. Chats, fill this out, man.
Now, I've had the pleasure of seeing the Tea Party a couple of times over the years, and your live shows always, like I say, it's atmospheric, it's intense, it's brilliant. You've got a lot going on, but what about the Tea Party in 2024? What's your live show like? Like, what can fans expect?
You know what? It hasn't changed much from the energy point of view. I was about ready to kill Jeff and Stuart on the last run because the first 4 songs were just bangers. And I'm like, okay, how about we do two bangers, then we slow it down just slightly, and then we get back into it just to catch the breath. But no, it really hasn't changed. The energy's still there. I think Jeff's turning into a better front man, because I mean, let's face it, he's the face of the band. He's the person out front. He's got great communication skills. He loves to talk to the audience. Sometimes we have to tell him to stop talking and just get on with the song. But you know what I mean? He's got this great dynamic between crowd and communion between the band and the audience. And so the energy level is still there. We still smile a lot. We laugh a lot. I know I laugh a lot because I know I'm in the back looking at these skinny dudes' asses and just having a good time, and watching the people in the front row having a great time. So I don't think the energy's gone. I think we've learned how to, take it on a bit of a journey throughout the night, embrace those slower parts, bring it down, let everybody breathe so that they can get back into it. And then once they've just settled down and they're all chill, you hammer them over the head with a big one again. So it's kind of cool. You kind of grow into that role of, orchestrator and the person leading the orchestra. Conductor.
Conductor. All right, mate. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you more, bro. And